Hey everybody, it's Party Elite with another episode of Total Breakdown. We're starting this week off with another ESL battle from the ongoing 1v1 tournament, Season 2. In this one, Asgair leads the Dwarfs into battle against Trillus Maximus Bretonnia. The Dwarfs are led by Grumbrindal himself, who comes in with Foe Seeker and Flash Bomb. Two runesmiths come to the field to provide some much needed support, one arriving with Master Rune of Groth One Eye for leadership boost to nearby allies, Forge Fire for extra armor piercing damage from nearby allies, Master Rune of Stromny Redbeard for leadership and melee attack boost to nearby allies, the Rune of Oath and Steel, the Rune of Negation, and the Rune of Wrath and Ruin for more armor, higher damage resistance, and of course, direct damage to high threat enemy units. The other runesmith comes in with the Rune of Negation and the Rune of Wrath and Ruin only. Then, we've got some miners with blasting charges that can break up incoming enemy charges, and 4 units of Dwarf Warriors. The Warriors of Dragonfire Pass provide some anti-infantry strength, which is great when facing up against Bretonnian infantry, as are the Slayers who can be used to handle Bretonnian cavalry. The Grumbling Guard make for a great armor-piercing unit that can also provide morale support to nearby units and help regain some lost vigor among nearby troops as well. Then, we've got the Dragonback Slayers who will make much quicker work of enemy cavalry than regular Slayers, and also some Rangers with great weapons and Ulthar's Raiders. Both of these ranged units are able to handle themselves for a short time if they're caught in melee. This isn't a terrible idea when up against an army that might easily circumvent your front line and strike at your ranged units with their own high mobility units. They also have stock, so they can be kept hidden away in the early stages of the battle, making your opponent think you may not have ranged units. Finally, we have the Bolt Thrower. Not a common sight on the battlefield, but it can cause a decent amount of damage, and considering its anti-large and armor piercing, is a decent pick against Bretonnia if you can't bring any cannons or organ guns. The Fey Enchantress leads Bretonnia, and she's equipped with the Blessing of the Lady, Aura of the Lady, whose magic resistance is frankly pointless against dwarves, Life Bloom, Mist of the Lady, Awakening of the Wood, Earth Blood, Flesh to Stone, Arcane Conduit, Favor of the Fey, and Chalice of Potions. The Green Knight rides in to aid Bretonnia, and he's equipped with Sacred Guardian to keep him alive by retreating him into the forests, and the Dolorous Blade to give him a hefty boost to melee attack and weapon damage. 3 units of Peasant Mob, 2 ranked up to rank 3 and 1 ranked up to rank 2, can be used to bog down dwarf units and eat ranged fire early on. Men-at-Arms are a fairly weak pick against dwarfs, but they can be used against Slayers and Dwarf Warriors to some degree, while the Battle Pilgrims can get a fair amount of damage in due to Frenzy. The Grail Reliquae will provide some leadership support, which has become even more essential since the latest update, and the 3 units of Foot Squires can cause some serious damage to the dwarves with their armor-piercing and anti-infantry capabilities. The 2 units of Peasant Bowmen provide some range support, 2 units of Questing Knights bring some highly mobile anti-infantry units to the field, and the unit of Field Trebuchet will ensure the dwarf army will pay in lives if it decides to camp atop a hill. Alright, as always, we're going to start with a conversation about deployment, and it's relatively simple from both sides of the field this time. Now, first things first, the Dwarfs, we have, again, a pretty standard deployment. Bolt Thrower up front, good idea. Try to get it in range as soon as possible. Right behind the Bolt Throwers, we have the 2 Runesmiths as well as Grumbrindal, and then this line of Dwarf Warriors alongside the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass as well. Then, behind them, we've got the Grumbling Guard, and again, from this position, they're able to dive in wherever necessary in the front line just to provide some extra support. And right next to them, we of course have the Rangers with great weapons as well as Ulthar's Raiders, still hidden because they have the stalk ability, so they won't be spotted until the enemy gets relatively close. Then all the way back here, the Slayers as well as the Dragonback Slayers, and these guys of course are able to intercept any incoming cavalry. If they're coming in from the sides or if they come in from the rears, these guys will be able to respond and protect the rear lines, or rather the back of the dwarfs, as well as the ranged units themselves, of course. And up front here, tucked away in these trees, you'll see the miners with blasting charges, taking some advantage, I suppose, of their vanguard deployment, just a little bit ahead of the lines, and that way if the enemy comes charging in, these guys can get some early shots off, throw in some of their blasting charges, and then come charging in, allowing a bit of a flanking maneuver, or at least some disruption among enemy lines. Now, let's take a look at Bretonnia. Overall, pretty standard, outside of one sort of strange deployment decision there, but let's take a look here. Now, the Trebuchet, as you can see, has already started firing because it is already within range of the enemy, but the front line consists of Peasant Mob on either flank, and this unit of men-at-arms in the center, again, able to absorb early shots. Then back here, we've got our foot squires, sort of forming the bulk of the center, able to dive in and provide support in the center. And this unit of foot squires as well, able to strengthen this left flank, or sort of swing in there as they move down the field to provide strength in the middle here. Then off on either side, we have the units of battle pilgrims. And again, these guys will be fairly capable against dwarf warriors, so by which I mean dwarf units. With frenzy, they're able to get some damage in, so not a bad call. These guys can come in from the flanks to provide some strength. An interesting peasant bowman placement, keeping them off to the sides here. I guess the thinking was to make sure they don't get obstructed when lines meet, so they're able to fire in from the sides, or potentially from the rears without any obstruction. So risky placement because they can get taken care of, but I can sort of see the reasoning behind it. Off to the side here, we have our 2 units of questing knights. And these guys, of course, are able to come in from the flanks if the dwarf is forced to come down here, able to come in from the rear. But with dwarves, you can sort of suspect they'll be staying back, firing with artillery or ranged units some way or the other. So again, from here, they're able to move forward and come in from the flanks. And then finally, this part's a little interesting, all the way off to the side here at first, I believe he was deployed, was the Green Knight, and that's just a little bit too far to be efficient. The Green Knight, if you're going to use his Vanguard deployment, you still want to keep him close to the enemy. Not entirely sure what the thinking was there, because right now he's already been exposed. He's not hidden anymore, so it's not like there was a long con of coming in from the flank or anything like that. But with all that said, let's get into the battle. As I mentioned, the field trebuchet has already opened shots off, and those first few shots were actually targeting the bolt thrower. Not a great call. The bolt thrower is a very, very small unit. There's only 3 bolt throwers, they're small targets, and there's only a handful of dwarfs manning each bolt thrower. I will say the dwarf player has done a good job of thinning out his lines, and as a result of that, the shots coming in from the field trebuchet aren't able to cause as much damage. Remember, densely packed squares are more easily hit by ranged units, and that does include artillery. Now, you will notice, though, the field trebuchet has sort of realized that it's wasting its time targeting the bolt throwers, not having done barely any damage, and is now targeting this unit of dwarf warriors, which is a fair call. Of course, it can't see these rangers with great weapons, and back here, these slayers might just be out of range, or might even not be visible due to the hill just yet. But so good call there, targeting a more viable, threatening enemy unit. Meanwhile, the bolt throwers are actually firing into the field trebuchet. It's not the worst call. The field trebuchet can get hurt a little bit by the bolt throwers, but again, there are better targets to hit. The questing knights that are coming up, for example, because the bolt throwers are anti-large, so get some damage into enemy cavalry nice and early, or even hurt some of these foot squires who ultimately can cause a lot of damage when lines do meet. I do understand the desire to take out the field trebuchet. You'd rather take them out and then have all the time in the world to camp up there, but it is a bit of a risky play. Now, you'll notice there is some movement behind the dwarf lines. Earlier, these slayers here were actually tucked away and hidden in these trees, and as they are hidden, what they can actually do is protect this left flank much more efficiently. If the cavalry was to try sneaking in from here, because it looks open, they might actually take that risk, and the slayers are able to dive in. Keeping units like slayers visible at all times, rather than allowing you to counter enemy cavalry, it just lets the enemy know that they can't enter that way, and so they just find another way in. So this is a nice move. Now, as the 2 units of questing knights come charging in, you'll see these dragonback slayers are actually pushing forward to respond. It's quite clear what the targets are, at least for one of these questing knights. Meanwhile, over here, these miners with blasting charges, unfortunately unable to get their charges off, and so they take a decent hit and get flung back a fair bit. These questing knights early on do a little bit of damage to the dwarf warriors, and realize the more important target is this unit of bolt throwers. So they dive in and they get a fair amount of damage in, but you'll see the dragonback slayers arrive almost instantaneously, and so these questing knights are forced to retreat, but not before they're hit by the rune of wrath and ruin. So good use of the rune there, just to make sure that these guys are damaged early on, because again, cavalry can really ruin the dwarfs' day, and no, the pun was not intentional there. So good job there targeting them, and you'll see the dragonback slayers are actually giving chase. So not really the best call. You want to keep your slayers close to your army. You're not going to close that gap. So they are giving chase, though. Maybe a misclick, maybe just trying to scare them off even farther away, but you'll notice the peasant bowmen up here are responding. They are able to, of course, cause a fair amount of damage to the slayers, especially from the sides. They're not armored or anything, but seeing those peasant bowmen opening fire, the dragonback slayers are pulled back almost instantaneously. They take very little damage, and they do get pulled back almost instantaneously. So nice little bit of movement there, and you'll notice the The Peasant Bowmen now are being pushed forward just to give chase, and the Questing Knights as well. Now trying to find another point of entry, and again, because these Slayers are hidden, this does look like a viable, well, point of entry, but again, just pulling back, realizing there's no real option there because of these Dragonback Slayers, so pulling back and around, and you'll notice both the Peasant Bowmen now are being pushed forward. So really slow start, and you'll see the Bolt Thrower continues to hurt the Field Trebuchet, doing a fair amount of damage, and the Field Trebuchet not really being used to its greatest efficiency. It's only got 14 kills so far, and while there's only so much you can do, I suppose it's really the Dwarf player has done a good job of thinning out his lines and making sure that hits aren't able to land as sort of densely as the Field Trebuchet would like. Now, again, the Dragonback Slayers are pushing forward, forcing these guys back, but the Peasant Bowmen are there to sort of screen the cavalry, so great little bit of movement there. The cavalry almost sort of baiting the Slayers out, allowing the Peasant Bowmen to open fire, and you'll see a good hit there into the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass, doing a decent amount of damage, so, you know, despite only a handful of kills, getting a decent amount of work done, ultimately, weakening the Dwarven lines so that when lines do meet, they will, well, fall quicker. And again, some range fire coming into these Dragonback Slayers, not doing a lot of work, but just causing a little bit of hurt. Now, these Questing Knights could have been sent in from the side. I think what's going on right now is the Bretonnian player is not sure if that is the only unit of Slayers, and doesn't really want to move anywhere until he sees the other unit, because they might be tucked away here, they might be, you know, tucked away back here, or as they are, they might be tucked away here, and it's dangerous to make a decision without knowing exactly where the enemy is. Unfortunately, Bretonnia isn't able to scout the enemy. Now, as this range fire sort of continues to come in, you'll see these Peasant Bowmen are firing at the Bolt Thrower, and that's a good call. You want to shut this down relatively nice and early. You don't want to waste Trebuchet shots on it, but the Peasant Bowmen can do a decent amount of work on the Bolt Throwers, and again, these Peasant Bowmen continue to fire on the Dragonback Slayers over there, and finally you'll see Bretonnia has adjusted its lines a little bit. It is maybe planning on moving forward, and the Dwarfs as well, being forced to move forward because the Trebuchet fire is starting to cause a little bit of damage here, and the Peasant Bowmen are harassing quite effectively. And you'll see here these Slayers now have been pulled out, joining the Dragonback Slayers up here, so now Bretonnia sort of is fully aware of the anti-large capabilities of the Dwarves, and they're able to push in, and rather than going this way, they decide to go this way, which I'm not exactly sure what the thought was there, but you'll notice this unit of Dwarf Warriors, or rather this unit of Miners, is venturing maybe a little too far forward. These Questing Knights are having none of it. They don't need to deal with that, but the Green Knight does dive in and just try to cause some damage early on. And you'll notice these Slayers instantly being pushed forward to respawn, trying to shut the Green Knight down, and that's a good call. The Green Knight can be very dangerous if left alive for too long, so definitely a good idea to try and shut the Green Knight down as soon as possible. Now over here, the Questing Knights again just slowly kind of moving off to the side. This section is very much open right now, so it's a good call to move in there, and you'll notice they did get stuck in with the Peasant Bowmen, so you just need to be a bit more careful with managing your troops. This isn't a very crucial moment, but ordering one unit through another will sort of force the cohesion to fall apart, will force the unit to lose its, you know, strength in charge bonus and things like that, so just a good idea to be careful about things like that. Now, the Questing Knights finally decide to come on this side as the Slayers over here do commit to staying on this left flank. You'll see the Questing Knights are finally starting to come around. Peasant Bowmen continue to open shots off at these Dwarf Warriors, doing a little bit of damage. Now the Questing Knights decide to come diving in, and they'll do decent work, of course, punching through these Dwarf Warriors. They're not braced, they're not ready for the charge, but of course, the Rune of Wrath and Ruin does go through, causing a fair amount of damage to this unit of Questing Knights. So, again, good use of runes there, just to make sure these guys are hurt. And over here, you'll see the Peasant Bowmen opening shots off now at these Miners, and again, doing a fair amount of work there, but in response, the Rune of Wrath and Ruin does fall on these Peasant Bowmen as well. Now, I'm not sure if that's the best call, to be perfectly honest. Peasant Bowmen can be shut down just by chasing them down. They'll be forced to run away, and then they can't open shots, so potentially a waste of a rune there. Could have been better targeted on some cavalry, for example, but of course, with the two units of Dwarf Warriors here giving chase, the Peasant Bowmen are forced to retreat. Now you'll notice the Questing Knights as well. They are, after that quick little hit, they are able to run away into the distance, and honestly, a little bit of poor management here by the Dwarfs. The Slayers are all the way over here, despite the cavalry having traveled this way, punched in for a charge, and now pushing back here. The Slayers still haven't moved in to respond, so a little bit of mismanagement there, not really ideal. And you'll notice now Bretonnia is moving down with full force, and the Dwarf lines have sort of lost all their cohesion. They're not really in much of a line anymore, and now the Questing Knights take their opportunity, come in from the rear, and dive into the Bolt Throwers, basically taking them out of commission more or less. This runesmith comes back to respawn, but that really isn't going to do much. The questing knights are able to push forward, and now they dive into the rangers with great weapons, do a decent amount of damage there as well, dive into the front lines from the rear, do a decent amount of work on the warriors of Dragonfire Pass. So great work there by the questing knights. And you'll see over here we have the Chalice of Potions coming down, but not before the Green Knight is being absolutely destroyed by Grumbrindal. Now, Grumbrindal causes magical damage, and the Green Knight was at full health right up until Grumbrindal got in there and brought in his weapon strength of 500. Now, again, because he does magical damage with each hit, he just chews away at the Green Knight's health, and in about 2 or 3 swings, the Green Knight has already been taken care of, and despite Dolorous Blade barely doing any damage, taking 11 lives with him before he gets taken care of. So that's just another example of really good management there, able to see that the Green Knight is there, pin him down with the Dwarf Warriors, or with the Miners, sorry, get the Dragonback Slayers in there, get the Runesmith in there, and then finally get Grumbrindal himself in there to cap off the Green Knight once and for all. So great management there. And meanwhile, over here, you'll see this unit of the Grumbling Guard just barely able to dodge the bulk of the damage from the Chalice of Potions, but still a fair amount does affect them. They were just at the edge of that explosion, so they still get hurt a fair amount, just barely dodged it, mainly because of a counter charge. Bretonnia should have waited maybe just a few more seconds to cast that, waited for these lines to meet, and then these guys would have been stationary, and that Chalice of Potions would have done significantly more damage. Meanwhile, back here, you'll see the Questing Knights once again hit by the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Great cast, great use of runes, making sure that these guys get taken care of because the Slayers are preoccupied elsewhere. These guys now finally being sent in to respawn, but again, just far too little, far too late. These Questing Knights have done a decent amount of work. They've shut down the Bolt Thrower more or less. They also got a little bit of damage into the front lines, making sure that it's weakened for when the Bretonnian infantry finally does engage. So just a little unfortunate there. Meanwhile, up here, you'll see these Battle Pilgrims have been hit by Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Not a bad call. Again, Battle Pilgrims are threatening. They do have Frenzy, so they can get some damage in. So getting that in sort of nice and early, not a terrible call. And you'll see, as we resume to full speed, the Green Knight with Grumbrindal behind him does fall, and Grumbrindal is very effective at taking care of ethereal units, and he showcases that in just 3 or 4 swings right now. Now again, you'll see over here, the Questing Knights, they're now being hit by these blasting charges from the Miners, not a bad call, and they do get some support in the form of Flesh to Stone to give them extra armor. Not entirely sure if that's the best spell to bring to the table, to be perfectly honest, but they do get that support and are now sort of just trouncing around, trying to get some damage in. Over here, you'll see the Slayers are trying to shut down these Questing Knights and doing a good job of it. These Questing Knights just caught out of position, unable to get out of there, and with the Ulthar's Raiders causing a decent amount of damage, again, they are able to hold themselves in melee, and the Slayers coming in as well. The Questing Knights are forced away. Now, a really important issue here, and I know I mention this all the time, but I continue to see it even at competitive levels, so I'm just going to mention it one more time. When you've got a situation like this, you really need to come in from the flanks. Peasant Mob will do a good job of bogging down the enemy, but you need to come in from the flanks, you need to come in from the rears, not only because that will allow you to cause more damage, but also because it will really allow more morale damage to take place, and that can be quintessential. So just a quick note, don't do that. Over here as well, you'll see a massive clump. Some of these guys could have been sent, yes, it would take time for them to get there, but they could have been sent around in some decent flanking maneuvers or punching through the center where there are some gaps, but instead they're clumped back here, and a lot of these guys just aren't getting any hits in. This is a large number of individuals not getting any hits in, so very wasteful. And I know I mentioned that a lot, but it's important, and I see it at all levels of play. Now, back to full speed. You'll see these Questing Knights are coming back after sort of swinging around this way. They get another decent charge in. They hit the Raiders, and then now they're diving into the front lines again from the rear, getting a nice rear charge in. So good movement there. Unfortunately, the Dragonback Slayers are right behind them, giving decent chase, and the Questing Knights once again shut down. This is, of course, the other unit of Questing Knights. Now, they're very much trapped in that situation, and they are being quickly taken care of. Peasant Bowmen, meanwhile, trying to get some shots into the Grumbling Guard, try to do a decent amount of damage in there, and these Peasant Bowmen as well trying to push in from the side to get some shots off. You'll notice over here the Battle Pilgrims, again, Rune of Wrath and Ruin alongside the Runesmith, doing a lot of work, and great move here. So Grumbrindal being sent in against the Fey Enchantress, and I absolutely love this moment in the battle. You'll see he drops Rune of Oath and Steel to provide some support, helping these guys out. Rune of Negation goes down as well, so they're not able to take damage, and Flash Bomb goes down, completely devastating this entire clump of units. Now, again, not causing damage, but Flash Bomb reduces melee defense, reduces speed, which isn't important right now, and reduces leadership. That reduction in melee defense is absolutely marvelous, because all of these guys now are eating a lot more hits. So just a beautiful play there, getting Grumbrindal in there, getting him on the Fey Enchantress, reducing her melee defense, making sure she can get shut down instantaneously, and then getting flash bombed again in this massive clump, just ensuring that some of the weaker dwarf units are still able to get a lot of damage through. So great play there. And meanwhile, you will have noticed an Awakening of the Wood did go down over here among the Grumbling Guard, and the Awakening of the Wood, while it doesn't do a lot of damage, especially against dwarfs, it does do a little bit of damage, and it triggers Life Bloom, so just helping out, trying to keep Bretonnia alive, literally speaking. These peasant mob, meanwhile, again, after having retreated, willing to come back into the fray, so they are being sent in. Good management of retreating troops. These questing knights, really, they're more or less taken care of at this point. And back here, you'll see these rangers are opening shots off, just trying to get some damage in. And meanwhile, this center is collapsing with that reduction in leadership, that reduction in melee defense. They're taking a lot more damage than usual, and so they just start collapsing and falling back. Grumbrindal, meanwhile, giving chase to the Fey Enchantress, and you'll see the bolt throwers opening shots off at the peasant bowmen. I don't know if that's the best call. They could have actually... no, probably a better call than anything else. Everything else would have been obstructed. They wouldn't really have a decent hit on the Fey Enchantress, so a decent idea to take care of the peasant bowmen, try and get them to retreat because they are causing a fair amount of damage to these rangers, which again, great call. Shut down enemy range because that can cause a lot of damage and morale damage. Meanwhile, back here, you'll see Ulthar's raiders just sort of hanging back now, not really able to get any shots off. I think they're largely obstructed, and again, over here, the Foot Squires now against the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, again, getting that damage in. Good call there. Very high threat unit. They're anti-infantry, they're armor piercing, so just get that damage in. And up here, you'll see these Battle Pilgrims still bogged down by a lowly unit of miners now, and very quickly being dispatched of. Runesmith able to free himself and is now pulling back into the main engagement as well. Meanwhile, these peasant mob are pushing in, and these questing knights just kind of hanging back. If they get too close, they'll actually be scared right off. I think their leadership is low enough for that to happen. And you'll see another Chalice of Potions is being prepped to drop down on the Grumbling Guard here. So good call. They're just trying to cap these guys off, but it's just a little bit too far back to cause a significant amount of damage. It will hurt them, but a little bit further up, and it could have actually completely wiped them out. And you'll see here again the Runesmith coming in. Unfortunately, these Dwarf Warriors give up on the left flank, so they do fall back with the Peasant Mob and the Foot Squires pushing in. And there you'll see another Rune of Wrath and Ruin on this unit of Foot Squires, just causing them a decent amount of hurt. Back here, meanwhile, the Fey Enchantress tries to come back into combat, but Ulthar's Raiders open some shots off, forcing her to rout, and that's, of course, going to cause a decent amount of leadership damage. And you'll see these guys are just trying to sort of punch through the center here, try to cause a lot of damage, and the Dwarf Warriors are taking a lot of damage. The Warriors of Dragonfire Pass, as well as the Slayers, they're all taking a fair amount of damage because, again, they do have, Bretonnia does have some anti-infantry units in there, and it is a pretty massive clump of enemy units. Over here, again, the Foot Squires under the influence of the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, just trying to cap them off. The Runesmith trying to stay alive just so he's able to push in and support the center again, but Grumbrindal comes in here and takes care of the Grail Relique, forcing another drop in leadership. That, alongside the retreat of the Fey Enchantress and the drop of the Green Knight, basically leads to the demise of Bretonnia. You'll see they do start to shatter and very close to defeat, but the Dwarfs just clamber through for a Pyrrhic victory. This battle really showcased some nice movement from both armies early on. Both generals seemed a little cautious at first, but it allowed us to see counters at work. Slayers chasing cavalry, cavalry baiting Slayers into range units, Grumbrindal ruining the Green Knight's day, and then following up with the Fey Enchantress and that massive clump of infantry. Unfortunately, Bretonnian forces seemed to lose that finesse as the battle went on, allowing units to clump up into a meat grinder more or less. Some better troop management from Bretonnia could have actually afforded Bretonnia the victory. As always, guys, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content and keep sending in your battle replays. I think it is one of the best ways to learn, and I love highlighting battles from the community. It's great to see what other generals are doing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield.